Okay, so I'll start recording now if that's okay.
Good call,
Okay.
Chloe. It
So
might
we
just be
talked
that
about
he
the
needs the
seven, the
upgrade.
significance of sevens. And yeah, Robert might need to reinstall his Zoom.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's first read this first text on from Mishpatim, from the book of from the book of Exodus, from Parashat Mishpatim. Would somebody like to read this text for us, please? Just here in the middle.
I can go ahead and do it if nobody else is interested in doing it. You're not to take up an empty rumor. Do not put your hand in with a guilty person to become a witness for wrongdoing. You're not to go after many people to do evil. And you are not to testify in a quarrel so as to turn aside toward many and thus turn away. Even a poor man, you are not to respect as regards his quarrel. Now, when you counter your enemy's ox or his donkey straying, return it to him. And when you set the donkey of one who hates you crouching under its burden, restraining it from abandoning it to him, unbind it, yes, unbind it together with him. You are not to turn aside the rights of your needy as regards his quarrel. From a false matter you are to keep far. And one clear and innocent do not kill, for I do not acquit a guilty person. A bribe you are not to take, for a bribe blinds the open-eyed and twists the words of the righteous. A sojourner you are not to oppress. You yourselves know well the feelings of the sojourner, for sojourners were you in the land of Egypt. For 60 years you are to sow your land and to gather in its produce, but in the 7th you are to let it go, and to let it be that the needy of your people may eat, and what remains, the wildlife of the field shall eat. Do thus with your vineyard, with your olive grove.
Okay, thank you very much. Good. So the first time we meet Shmitah, it's within a whole set of moral codes. Okay, so what's the kind of the theme of this part of Torah? What are they trying to teach us here?
How to treat other people and how to be respectful of others, kinda.
Okay.
At least that's the theme that I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm. What else can people see?
I think it feels to me to be specifically speaking against greed.
Okay, in what way?
Because it's constantly referring back to, well, greed and temptation of revenge almost, like, because there's like the referring back to when you encounter X, do X. So it's kind of like warning against doing the opposite of that, I guess. So like, don't steal the donkey, it's not yours. Feels like the like pulling away from greed. But yeah, there's also just like kindness and compassion with the 5th verse. But it really has to do with relationship to other, like enemy, or there's a lot of reference to enemy.
Why do you think that is? Like, why do all of you think? Maybe also somebody who hasn't kind of jumped in yet would like to share. Why do you think there's so many references to to enemies specifically, not to people we like, okay, but to people we don't like? And then how do we behave towards them? What's it trying to do? So imagine this. So you're walking along, I'm going to take the 5th verse because it's kind of striking. You're walking along the road and you see somebody you really, like a neighbor that's really bothering you, and you know, their donkey is making total noise all the time. You hate both of them. You can't stand them. And the donkey is underneath this, like he collapsed because something really heavy. Okay, something really heavy was on him. And this has been a neighbor that's been bugging you and stealing from you and being really mean to you. And the donkey is like, oy vey vey. And so this is somebody you don't like. And your first inclination is to turn away. It's like to go in another direction. And they're like, no, this donkey is suffering. Your neighbor is suffering. You don't like them. You go and you help. Okay, you help take, okay. So it's not somebody you like. It's not your friend. It's not your family. It's somebody you don't like. So what's Torah trying to do here? What's trying to create in us?
So with enemies, it's always harder to do the more compassionate, respectful, or kind thing towards them because we don't like them for whatever reason, and we would want to wish ill on them. So
not to help them.
Or not help them. Like basically with enemies, we really don't want to help them at all.
Okay. So we're
trying to be nice to them is harder.
So what's the word here? It's not from the goodness of our own heart. What's the word here? Why are we doing this? Why are we helping this neighbor with her or his donkey?
It's the just thing to do.
Yeah.
Is it the
Our obligation? Okay, we are obligated.
Moral obligation. Yeah, that's right. It's moral.
Okay? It's our obligation. We do it not because it's comfortable and makes us feel warm and fuzzy, but because that's what we're supposed to do. Okay? And it won't necessarily make us feel warm and fuzzy. He might be totally mean to us. Okay? This isn't about feeling good. It's about doing what is right and being obligated to doing that. Okay? So some of these commands here are about just doing the right thing. There's one that's really difficult, and the third verse, and I'm sorry that we're kind of, we haven't entered Shmitah yet, but it's important to notice this before we go into Shmitah. Even a poor man, you're not to respect as regards his quarrel, okay? So they're even asking us to do something that we would say, oh, maybe Torah wouldn't want us to do this. So you're a judge, and somebody who is poor is coming to be judged. And you feel compassionate towards the person. They may be in the wrong, okay? They may be criminals and they've done a terrible thing. But you have this, like, inside of you, you're like, okay, maybe I'll be maybe I'll go around the law. I'll go against the law because this person is poor. And they're saying, no, even in this case, you need to do the right thing. Okay, and the right thing is probably at this point not to give him, not to ignore what he's done just because he's poor. And okay, so again, this could be difficult to, we will need to go in, if we were going to do this law now, we would go in and try and understand the situation there, okay? But they're saying there are things we're supposed to do because we're obligated and not because they make us feel good. And sometimes it's really, really difficult, which leads us to Shmitah, because Shmitah is difficult, okay? It's not an easy commandment to live with. And whereas Shabbat is something the Jews have been doing for generations inside and outside of the land of Israel, okay, wherever we've been living. Shmitah is tied to the land, and it's also very difficult to do, because what are we asked to do here? What is it? What are we asked? What's the actual commandment? What are we supposed to do? So let's read this again. For 6 years, you're to sow your land and to gather in its produce, okay? So that's the normal thing. That's the normative. For 6 years, we work our land. First of all, let's notice that there's a piece of land that we believe is ours, okay? Sow your land. I inherited it from my dad. It's mine. Doesn't belong to anyone else. So for 6 years, I behave as if that's reality. And I'm supposed to work the land and gather in its produce. And the produce is mine because I grew it, and it's on my piece of land that I inherited from my dad. But in the 7th year, you are to let it go. Tishmetena. It's the word that they use here, tishmetena, is literally like you're holding a piece of cloth and you're opening your fingers and the cloth falls down, okay? It falls out of your hands. You need to do the act of opening your hands and letting this piece of land fall out from your hands. It's not yours. It doesn't belong to anyone now. Unetashta, let it be. Unetashta is the same natash, it's the same root for like abandoning. It doesn't belong to anyone anymore. You abandon the land. Now, we're in an agricultural society. What does that feel like? I'm not even progressing yet. What does it feel like if this is your land and on the 7th year you suddenly have to let it go and abandon it? Think for a moment, what does that make you? If this was your business, okay, you have your privately owned business that you worked really hard on building. I don't know, I'm just thinking of a cupcake store that opened next to the shul. No, a cookie store that opened next to the shul. And I saw how, you know, they were working hard on creating this business. And then it works really well for 6 years. And on the 7th year, they have to let it go. And any cookies that remain in the store, people can just come in and eat them. And anything just belongs to everybody. And the animals can come in. What does that feel like?
To me, one thing that would feel like is I would lose my sense of purpose for that whole year. I mean, if that's what I was used to doing every day, was going out and working in my field and tending to those crops and stuff to make a living for my family, and I would lose sense of purpose for that whole year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great perspective. Yeah, what do I do during that year? What else?
I would feel devastated. It would be like you have to grieve the loss of something so large.
What were you grieving? What would you be grieving for?
Grieving because it's something that was yours, something that it was just yours, and I'm not saying you didn't have to share, but it was yours and you're proud of it and you tended to it, and it's like a child, and then you have to give it up.
Mm-hmm. And anyone can go in and use it.
Yeah, and that's very strange feeling.
And imagine on the sixth year, you're still working the land, right? So actually the produce that comes up on the 7th year is due to the work that you had done on the 6th year, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just the 1 year, it's also the 6th year, the year before. And also the 8th year, like the first year in the new cycle, where you're allowed to sow the land, but what are you eating now? Like what? Because you produce something 1 year, you keep it, you eat it the next year as you're planting for the following year. So there's these 3 years actually where everything is kind of difficult. So it's not even just 1 year, it's 3 years. Okay.
Gila,
yeah.
just a quick question. You probably answered it earlier. Was everybody on the exact same cycle? So that 7th year fell for everyone at the exact same time?
Great question. We didn't talk about that. The idea is that yes, if I understand correctly, because they start counting from when they enter the land of Israel. So again, mythology, right? Because I don't think people actually entered like a horde of people, maybe, I don't know.
Right.
Probably didn't happen that way. But the understanding is that everybody has a Shemitah at the same time.
Because it would be difficult if they didn't, because how would you know then, as a poor person, if you were looking for land that you were able to just take food from, how would you know which land was which if they were different years? So that's why I was wondering.
No, that's a great question. And what I think and what makes sense is like Shabbat, we all celebrate Shabbat at the same time.
Okay.
I'm guessing they all celebrated, or if this ever happened, everybody did Shmitah at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
No, you know what? No, for sure it's everybody at the same time, because we'll get into it soon, but there's also the whole thing of letting go of debt, money
Yeah.
debt. And the Jubilee happens after
Yeah.
7 sevens, and that's like a big proclamation. No, for sure everybody did it at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah. So the whole land was basically, the whole land during that year was wild, like theoretically.
Honestly, I feel like I would be going through different cycles of feelings, because I think I would have the grief, but I think it would also be very freeing.
In a sense that.
In a sense, like, I don't know, like everybody's doing it together, so the land is wild, but like it's a year of rest for the land, and then it's a year of rest for the society too.
So those first couple of days of vacation where you go, oh yay, I get to sleep in, and then after a month or so you're going, I really need to find something to do.
Kind of like how what we're going through right now. Some of us.
I was trying not to go there, but yes.
Yeah.
But to be honest, when COVID kind of set in, and so there were actually discussions among some of us about this being a form of Shamitah, that we are practicing a form of Shamitah here, and what can we learn from it? Yeah, and maybe we could develop it and make it. And this is one reason why I thought it would be really. I mean, I've been thinking about doing this with all of us for a long time now, but I think this idea of Shamitah as a practice. Okay, you will sometimes hear this sound, and that's my dog sneezing and coughing. I'm sorry, he's 14.
Oh.
Yeah, he's very much a senior citizen. So the question is, how do we actually practice Shamitah today? Okay, that's the question. And I think COVID gave us kind of a glimpse into what this might start looking like. So let's continue just kind of reading, and wow, okay, it's already 8:30 and we have 15 more minutes for this, but that the needy of your, so the 7th, you're to let go, tishmetena, and let it be, unatashta, that the needy of your people may eat, and what remains, the wildlife of the field shall eat. Do thus with your vineyard and with your olive grove. Okay, so who is this being done for?
The whole.
Who's benefiting?
The whole.
And the whole consists of what?
The animals, the plants, the land itself, the people. The whole.
Everybody.
Everybody.
Everything that's alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, I think in our house, one of the greatest griefs we have with COVID is seeing everything go back, because we don't have a practice in place of sustainability, and like the glimmer of hope that came from some of the wildlife coming back, and like the like pollution levels going down so much, but there's like nothing collectively in place to ensure that changes again. So like our grief is more around that, and seeing how much positive change can come from people resting for 2 months. Like, yeah, anyway. So the 6-year cycle, like it's for the whole. It helps to nourish the whole collective of life.
And in a sense, it's like Shabbat in the fact that also that everybody is commanded to rest on Shabbat, right?
Yeah.
So it's you, your children, your slaves, because they had slaves then,
Mhm.
your animals, everybody that's living in your household rests on Shabbat. So in the same way, everybody that's living on your land rests on that year.
Mhm.
Ken, there was something I wanted to say about, no. I just wanted us to see that they kind of also focus on the vineyards and the olive groves. Okay, so it's not just the field, it's where that you grow food. Oh, I remember what I wanted to kind of point out. There is some thought that this kind of indicates that this practice could have only existed at a point of time where people were still, or originated perhaps at a point of time where people were not totally in agriculture, but were rather supplementing, foraging, like going out to look for food, and agriculture. So you could always fall back on, hunting and collecting food, and also having your own fields. Okay, so this might kind of indicate at the time that this was still possible to conceive of, okay, so for 1 year I let the land rest because I can always go into the forests and hunt something and collect something. But that means you need to have the right balance between places that are human and places that are wild. Has anybody read Percy Jackson?
Yes.
So, if you remember in Percy Jackson, they find the god Pan, the god of the wilderness, but he's dying. And he's dying because, I was just reading it yesterday with my daughter, and he's dying exactly because of this. There's no more wild wilderness. There's no, there can't be any god of wilderness, right? So, and that puts everybody into a bit of a difficult situation. But yeah, okay. So let's continue for a bit. Or unless somebody had something to say or ask or comment on this, on the first part.
Can I just say something about what I was thinking? Because I just found out about this today, and I was reading a lot about it. And being from an agricultural community, I'm really familiar with letting a field lie fallow, and you think of it as being unproductive, but it's so that it can become more fertile. So I found it like a really interesting correlation with what's happening right now. And that even if anyone who's tried to meditate, when you are sitting there and trying to make your mind just lie still, there's so much creativity and imagination within us. And like you just said, how maybe they had other sources besides agriculture. Maybe it made them a little more creative in what they were going to do in that other year. And maybe they saw that, as you spoke about, they maybe inherited their land from their father. Maybe they saw that as like giving back the land that they were given, giving it back to God for a year, and just kind of it being a bit of a sacrifice in that way. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, it is. And thank you for bringing and I'm really curious and maybe we can kind of bring that into to our next meetings. If people have information about local practices today or whenever, of actual people here, what they do with their land, and is it a cyclical thing, and if so, what's the cycle, and what happens during that time? Because the idea was not about, I don't think they indicate that the land would be barren at that time. It's about the focus here, like the spiritual practice and thank you for kind of focusing on that. The spiritual practice that people are supposed to go through here is not about being hungry, but it's about letting go. It's about letting go of ownership. And that's why the Shmitah, that's why the name of this practice is Shmitah. It's letting go. It's like letting go on a grand scale, okay? It's about not thinking you control everything. And it's, in a sense, I find this really similar to what we've been going through. I'm going back to COVID, but because what I've experienced now that we had to let go of our regular practices is that everybody's become really creative, like you're saying. Like we have to find new ways of meeting, we have to find new ways of studying. It's wonderful. But we had to let go. We had to be in a mindset that says, okay, we can't do what we always do. And Shmitah is a spiritual practice in that sense, which is why, although for the last 2,000 years, it's not being practiced in most places at all, because it might have been once thought to only belong to the land of Israel. In the last few years, since 2014, when this was brought out, the understanding is that this is really a really strong spiritual practice we can use anywhere where we connect with the land, and we're all connecting with the land, right? So how do we let go? That's the big question. So so this is really an invitation. If anybody has information, just let me know, and then perhaps you can expand on that next week or in 2 weeks, whenever you feel comfortable. Okay, that would be really, really, really interesting to add that. So let's kind of just read the next time that we meet Shemitah, and that's in Leviticus.
The Lord spoke to Moshe at Mount Sinai, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, when you enter the land that I am giving you, the land is to cease, a Sabbath ceasing to the Lord. For 6 years you are to sow your field. For 6 years you are to prune your vineyard. Then you are to gather in its produce. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of Sabbath ceasing for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. Your field you are not to sow, your vineyard you are not to prune. The aftergrowth of your harvest you are not to harvest. The grapes of your consecrated vines you are not to amass. A Sabbath of Sabbath ceasing shall there be for the land. Now the Sabbath yield of the land is for you, for eating, for you, for your servant, and for your handmaid, for your hired hand, and for your resident settler who sojourn with you, and for your domestic animal, and the wild beast that are in your land shall be all its produce to eat."
Okay, thank you very much. So what new information do we get here? I want us to focus on Shabbat, Shabbaton, Sabbath of Sabbath, okay? Shabbat of Shabbat, or Shabbat of Shabbaton. What does that mean? A Shabbat of all Shabbats.
Seven times, seven cycles of 7. Because if you go with Sabbath, and then Sabbath 7 days, and then Sabbath again, so you get the 7 of 7 idea. At least that's what I'm getting.
Okay, and what else can we learn from this? What is it? What does the title make this? What does it turn this year into?
A year-long Shabbat?
A year-long Shabbat. If I'm not mistaken, and I could check it, but I think sometimes, or there are traditions that refer to Yom Kippur nowadays as Shabbat Shabbaton. Okay, so this is like a central time in our calendar, or it could become a central time in our calendar. It is like we say, Holy of Holies, Kodesh Kodashim. So Shabbat Shabbaton is the Shabbat of all Shabbats. Okay. It's
because everybody was supposed to be able to relax and whatever, but nobody was meant to suffer through this time. They were still allowed to eat from the land and, enjoy the land.
It is absolutely not about suffering. Like, we need to be very clear that this spiritual practice is not about suffering at all. By the way, Yom Kippur is also not about suffering. Okay, right? And Shabbat is definitely not about suffering. Okay, so this Shmitah, this year of Shmitah, is not about suffering. It's not about going hungry. It's about everybody having food.
It doesn't say anything about not eating the grapes. It just says not amassing them.
exactly.
Yeah, this it's
Now
more
the
about,
Shabbat yield of the
letting it-
land is for you, for eating, for you, for your servant, for your handmaid, for the wild animal, the wild beast, okay? Everyone is supposed to have plenty, is supposed to have food on that year. Okay?
that year, the 7th year is more for, you spend 6 years harvesting, amassing. Now you just let everything sit and let people come and gather what they need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So exactly. So it's I want us to go to the beginning for a moment, and we were talking about the seven, the symbolism of seven, and of how it symbolizes something about going through time in many instances, and about cycles. And I want us to think for a moment on, just kind of to close for today, and maybe it's something to take with us and maybe bring back next time. I want us to think about the differences between times when a cycle can become Sisyphic work and times when a cycle can indicate something that's uplifting. Okay, like going over and over in a cycle can become drudgery. Is that a word in English?
Yeah.
Yeah. And on the other hand, we have these sacred cycles that are about going outside of this Sisyphic kind of mindset and going into a place that is sacred and uplifting and humanizing. Okay, so perhaps something to take with us for next week and think about, and maybe do some writing about, if you like writing or find other ways of thinking about it, is noticing the differences between cycles that cause you to go down and cycles that cause you to go up or out. Okay, and perhaps we could share that next time we meet. If you notice something in your experience, or you read something, or you want to share something about that. So one thing for us to think about, so first of all, I put it in the chat, I put a link to this resource book, and from what I read today, you're all very welcome to download it with or without a donation. And also I'm going to share here on the screen. And
would you mind putting it in the chat one more time, Rabbi? Because I was a few minutes late, so yeah, I missed the link.
Yeah, okay, I'm just going to stop sharing here. Okay, so I'll just put it in the chat again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then if people have any information about local practices of Shmitah, yeah, let's share that also next week, so we learn. Okay, good, wonderful. So it was really nice seeing most of you and kind of seeing other people's names. Hi, Vivian and Catherine. And next week again, 8 o'clock on Tuesday. And please write to me with any questions. And is everybody okay if I make like an email group for the people who were here? And then we'll all see each other's names. So, and
hi,
then
Vivian.
Conversation. Oh, hi, Korean. Hi.
There.
Yeah.
Robert would probably love if you added him to that group.
Oh, for sure.
He tried to get in and he couldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'll